Hello there, this is David Kennedy McCulloch, author of the Wully the Mahar Gome fantasy fiction stories, and I'm going to read you the opening chapter of Book 4, Shadow Canyon. It's another big long chapter book, but the chapters are mostly fairly short, although this first chapter is 10 pages long, but I think you'll find it intriguing enough that it might tempt you into wanting to read the rest of the book. Like all the Wully stories, the book's in 3 big parts. Part 1 is called Zagra, Part 2 is called Ometepe, and Part 3 is called Fucyclicon. And Chapter 1 is Stone Rot. Justin Arthur Zablonsky was sick of Washington, D.C. already. It was nothing but boring, stuffy buildings and snooty, no-fun museum curators. But ever since the family trip to Peru last year, his mom wouldn't take any risks. Okay, so they'd had a bunch of things mysteriously disappear when they were at Machu Picchu, but that was probably just pickpockets or street punks. They'd have those in DC too. But nothing would persuade his mom. There were to be no more foreign trips. Justin and his dorky sister Amelia were to be educated about the marvellous sights in their own great country, where everything was more civilised and safer. Whatever. So far they'd been to the Air and Space Museum, where the rockets and moon landing capsules were way smaller and less impressive than the ones you saw in the Star Wars movies. And the dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum didn't move or bite the heads off fat, slow adults like they did in Jurassic Park. Amelia had burst out crying when Justin suggested they go to the Holocaust Museum. She said it would be too sad. She said she was feeling sick and needed to get some fresh air. So here they were in the National Mall, taking a tour of the famous Washington Monument. Yawn. Did you know that the Washington Monument, at 555 feet tall, was the tallest man-made structure in the world until 1889, and that it is still the world's tallest stone obelisk? Made of marble, granite and bluestone gneiss, the walls are 15 feet thick at the base. Blah, blah, blah. Justin had slipped away from the tour group while his mom wasn't looking. He walked off across the grass to find a good spot for a photograph. It was a clear blue sky, so the straight white lines of the monument stood out clearly. There was a bunch of airplanes getting ready to land at Reagan Airport. Maybe he could try to get an angle where it looked like one of the jets was about to smash right into the monument. He took a few of those. They were good, but still not unusual enough to really impress his friends. What about lining things up so that it looked like a big jet was perched right on top of the pyramid at the top of the monument? That will be amusing. It was while Justin was looking through the camera viewfinder, waiting for the exact best moment for his shot, that the screaming began. It was faint at first, just a distraction. He needed to maintain full concentration. When the jet appeared to be sitting right on the tip of the monument, the ground began to rumble. The top of the obelisk began to look bigger in the viewfinder. It was angling towards Justin, leaving the jet alone in the sky again. How weird was that? When Justin Arthur Zablonsky pulled the camera away from his face, he suddenly felt dizzy. 555 feet of stone was tipping over at its base and was toppling directly towards where Justin stood on the grass of the National Mall. Justin dropped his camera and ran. The monument leaned over in surreal slow motion like a gigantic tree that had just been chopped through at its base. It groaned, shuddered, and began to speed up as it fell. The wind rushed in Justin's ears as he ran. The screaming seemed louder now, since it was coming out of his own mouth. Then the ground lurched and bounced. Justin tripped and fell as dust, grass, dirt and leaves showered down on his back. When the noise subsided, he picked himself up shakily on hands and knees and turned around. The massive stone monument lay along the length of the grassy mall. The top of the pyramid was pointing directly at Justin, just 20 feet away. Justin stayed motionless, speechless, and paralysed for several seconds. The sounds of sirens grew louder, coming from all directions in the city. When he finally snapped out of it, Justin had the strangest thought. He stared back at the spot where he had dropped his camera. Dang it! This would make the coolest photograph ever. But his camera was smashed to pieces underneath it. Admiral Horatio Nelson's grey sandstone face cast its stony gaze across the city of London from on top the 150-foot Corinthian column where it had stood in Trafalgar Square since 1843. In all that time, Lord Nelson had suffered the indignity of being covered in pigeon poop and being used as a prop for various events. Occasional humans had climbed up to be photographed standing beside his magnificent 18-foot presence. Some had eaten tea and sandwiches at his feet. Another had taken a parachute jump off the top. He had gotten covered in lights and been surrounded by drunken crowds of revellers every New Year's Eve. But throughout all of it, he had retained the same dignity and stiff upper lip that he had shown during his life. It was early evening in London on the day when the Washington Monument collapsed in Washington, D.C. As if in sympathy, Nelson's column began to crumble at its base and topple over. Who knew if Nelson's stone-cold eyes saw the ground rush towards him? Who knows if his ears heard the screams from the humans in the square below? He maintained perfect posture and decorum until his body smashed to smithereens between the fountains. The terrifying implications of this event began to reverberate into the streets and across the world as the 4 bronze lions at the base of the column looked on, unmoved. At 3 a.m. in Barcelona, Eduardo Mendoza was wending his way home from a party, feeling bored and unfulfilled. It was just another night of decadent self-indulgence. He had an attractive young woman draped over each of his arms, giggling and flirting with him. Their conversation was boring and complacent. As he often did, he took a detour to walk through Parc Jean Miro to show his companions the great sculpture Don y Ochel, Woman and Bird. Eduardo's grandfather, Balthazar, had brought him to see it many times. Balthazar was a great admirer of Miro's bold, confrontational artistic style. Since 1983, Donna y Ochel had thrust itself into the public consciousness. A sausage-shaped structure cast in concrete, it stood 72 feet tall and 10 feet thick, covered in brightly coloured tiles. Its abstract depiction of sexuality was offensive to some, admired by others, but provoked a powerful emotion from almost everyone. Eduardo enjoyed seeing that response from new acquaintances who saw it for the first time. A loud crash and a shower of water greeted Eduardo as he entered the park. The magnificent sculpture lay half submerged in the pond with shards of tiles scattered around it. There were no other humans to be seen in the park. The young women squealed in alarm. Eduardo furrowed his brow and reached for his phone to call the Guardia Urbana. By the time they arrived to cordon off the area, several chunks of brightly coloured tile had mysteriously disappeared. On the other side of the world, in Sydney Harbour, a highbrow cultural event was about to have a most dramatic climax. Barry Wilson would have rankled at the word highbrow, however. It suggested that you were some kind of elitist snob or something, and Barry was no such thing. Just because he preferred to listen to exquisite operatic arias rather than techno drivel or anger-soaked rap didn't make him highbrow. It made him someone with good taste in music, if you wanted his opinion. A house painter by day, Barry filled his smartphone playlist with Pavarotti, Hobson, Sutherland and Denise as he applied a second coat of champagne lemongrass paint to someone's ceiling. He would sing along with them at the top of his voice to blow away the monotony of his job. Barry had saved all year and stood in line for hours for the privilege of being here tonight. He had arrived early so that he could soak up the atmosphere and appreciate the majesty of the building itself. The Sydney Opera House is one of the most distinctive and iconic buildings of the 20th century. It sits proudly on Bennelong Point on Sydney Harbour, looking like a gigantic stack of clamshells half buried in the ground. It is an architectural marvel. The clamshells are formed from massive precast concrete covered in over 1 million white and cream tiles. The structure had absorbed an enormous amount of emotional energy over the years. When it was opened in 1973, it was 10 years late and more than tenfold over budget, resulting in harsh criticism and ridicule. But over the years since then, it had mostly received admiration and reverence from the millions of people who visited it every year. On the day when the Washington Monument, Nelson's Column, and Miro's sculpture all toppled over, Barry was blissfully unaware of these disturbing events. The concert hall was filled to capacity for a gala performance of Puccini's wonderful opera, Turandot. Barry Wilson sat among the spellbound audience and savoured every second. He had taken in the sumptuous costumes, the dramatic set, and the magnificent melodies that reverberated off the glorious acoustics of the hall. This was everything he had hoped for, and with the final act drawing to an end, Barry closed his eyes as the handsome tenor playing Calaf began to sing the famous aria, Nessun Dorma. The orchestra swelled, the choir rose, and tears washed down Barry's cheeks as Calif's voice soared to reach that magnificent high B, the penultimate note, the one that Pavarotti had made famous, a note of triumph that brought strong men to their knees. And just at that moment, the building shuddered. Plaster and chandeliers tumbled from the ceiling, and dissonant squeals of terror ruined the beautiful final note. Remarkably, no one died as opera-goers stampeded towards the exits. Barry was among the last to leave. The air was filled with choking dust by the time he made it outside. When the dust had settled the following morning, the beautiful symmetry and pleasing lines of the massive clamshells had been transformed. They slumped together like gigantic tortoises trying to hold each other up with embarrassment. The last piece of architectural destruction occurred back in the Northern Hemisphere, in Scotland's capital city, Edinburgh. News of the other monumental collapses was already buzzing around the world on flat screens and smartphones. So for the people walking along Princes Street, it was almost unsurprising to see one of their beloved icons crumble and fall before their eyes. The monument to honour the great Scottish writer Sir Walter Scott stands just off Princes Street in the gardens that lie below Edinburgh Castle. A Victorian Gothic monument, it is a rather shabby and fussy structure by modern-day standards, with its arches, columns, spires, and dozens of figurative statues depicting characters from Scott's novels. But the Scott Monument is much loved by tourists who visit it from around the world and climb the 288 steps to get to its top platform. When it collapsed on that fateful day, you might think that the locals would have been outraged, terrified and stunned. But it takes a lot to disturb the dour fatalism of the Scots. Folk were certainly surprised, but quickly began to consider themselves lucky. At least it had collapsed in the evening, when no one was climbing inside the monument. And at least it was the two columns in the south side of the structure that had given way. The great structure had tumbled down the slope into Princes Street Gardens without crushing any cars or blocking any part of Princes Street itself. By the time the late-night TV news crew was on the scene, they had their attractive TV anchor standing in front of the large pile of sandstone rubble, with the floodlit castle as a backdrop behind her. Regular viewers could see that her usually perfectly coiffed hair was a bit dishevelled and her makeup a little smudged. Leona Bell Mackenzie was a fresh new face on local television. While some might cynically think that she was hired for her youthful good looks and her earnest, intelligent demeanour, finishing top of her class at Napier University's honours degree in journalism told another story. Her producer had given her some sensational talking points to go through on the air tonight, but Leona Bell was having none of that. There had been 3 other mysterious structural collapses around the world in the past year that had intrigued Leona. The Leaning Tower of Pisa had collapsed, killing a German tourist who was standing too close at the time. A section of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris had crumbled during rush hour, causing chaos and bad temper for days. And in Vigeland Sculpture Park in Oslo, the famous monolith of naked humans clambering over each other 40 feet into the sky had crumbled and fallen during the night. All the news reporters repeated the same annoyingly unhelpful phrase: mysterious circumstances. Leona wanted to solve that mystery. She had looked into those circumstances for her honours dissertation, using techniques of investigative journalism on an international scale. During the past year, she had talked to colleagues, scientists, sculptors and police officers. She was already forming her own ideas about these mysteries. So when the lights came on and the cameras rolled, Leona Bell Mackenzie decided to throw out her producer's talking points and give the viewers a more in-depth perspective. Good evening, everyone. I'm sure that many of you are feeling stunned by the crazy events that have occurred all across the world in the past 24 hours. You may be wondering what on earth is causing this, and when on earth is it going to stop? I'm afraid that I can tell you more about what we don't know than about what we do know. At this point, we do not know if these architectural accidents are related to each other. They were not caused by earthquakes or explosions. We do know that. We need to consider terrorism, of course, but that seems unlikely. Nothing seems to connect these buildings except that they all are important and well-known public structures. There have been no claims of responsibility and no demands have been made by any of the usual terrorist groups. Could this be a natural disaster? Is this another manifestation of climate change or global warming? It's not likely due to the age of the buildings. While the Washington Monument, Nelson's Column, and our own beloved Scott Monument were all built in the mid-19th century, the Sydney Opera House was completed in 1973, and the sculpture in Barcelona was erected as recently as 1983. These structures are not made from the same stone either. The materials that have crumbled and failed include granite, gneiss, sandstone, marble, concrete, and ceramic tile. The only common feature is that the destruction seems to have taken the form of a rapid erosion at the base of each structure, erosion that appeared to have gone unnoticed and then spread quickly. Several major pharmaceutical and chemical companies are putting millions of research euros and dollars into investigating this process. Theories abound, theories that need to be tested. Some scientists have likened it to an infectious disease of stone, like fungal spores and mycelia burrowing into trees to weaken their structure. So there you have it. We may be on the cusp of discovering a new, dangerous and destructive force in the world. Stone rot. This is Leona Bell Mackenzie for Channel 4 News. 3 hours later, when the crowds had dispersed and the lights had dimmed, a melancholy silence descended on the pile of rubble that had once been full of interest and detail to pay homage to the great Scottish author. Of the 93 persons, 2 dogs and 1 pig that had been carved into the monument, all that remained were broken arms, heads, shields and tails that lay everywhere, scattered and inert. But among the chunks of motionless sandstone, a small piece of granite began to move. At 8 inches tall, plump in the middle, with a flat base and a pointy top, it could be mistaken for the tip of one of the spires. But the deep blue eyes that sparkled on its craggy face and the grim set of its jaw dispelled that idea. Wully the Mahar Gome was in a sombre mood. He stood on top of the wreckage in the valley of Princes Street Gardens and watched as a delicate piece of green jade walked slowly down the slope towards him. Wully could see that the creature held a plastic bag filled with sandstone dust in its long, elegant fingers. "So you've got a decent sample, I see, Jade. Does it look like the same as what you got from Oslo, Paris and Pisa?" Jade Dong, Wally's longtime friend and the most powerful translator in the Gome world, nodded his head sadly. I will test it carefully, Mahari-san, to divine its history, but the pattern seems to be the same as the others. Wally sighed. So, it has started in earnest then. The cataclysm. They've had a few trial runs that have made them bolder. Now they're targeting a wheen of locations all at once. To what purpose do you think? Oh, I think they've got several purposes, Jade. By destroying structures with such a powerful emotional connection to humans, they're creating strong petroglyphs for use of the local Gomes. That way they will increase the loyalty and support of those Gomes for battles to come. And by destroying so many proud monuments to Western human civilization, they're hoping to sow suspicion and hostility among human allies. Jade Dong studied Wally's furrowed brow. He could tell that Wally had more to say. You think Bluebeard of Muirkirk is behind this, Mahari-san? Wally nodded. He'll no be working alone, but it definitely has Bluebeard's stamp on it. He's taunting me, Jade. He's letting me know that he can strike at all the places I care about. The USA, where Finlay and Hadley live. Scotland, just to stick it to Hugh MacDougall. Barcelona, just to let me know he's tracking on Alina too. But not Peru, where Curricula, the Inca princess, comes from. And why London and Sydney? I can't be sure, Jade. But I think he's toppled a monument in Scandinavia instead of Peru, to let me know that he knows where Tessa is holed up right now. I'm no sure why he brought down Nelson's column. Maybe to irritate and punish Lord Dover of Britannia and his cronies for the damage they did to the Slagpile army during the Battle of Tarjo Plain last year. Bluebeard has a powerful hatred of the English. It's the attack on Australia that worries me the most, though. I think he's letting me know that none of my friends are safe. He may be trying to irritate the great Aboriginal rock whisperer into coming back to life. For what purpose I know not, but it worries me. What plans do you make then, Mahari-san? What would you have me do? Complete your investigations of the... What did that wee reporter call it? Stone rot. She's a smart lassie. That's a good name for it. See what you can find out about it, Jade, and keep searching for Tessa's essence too. As for me, I need to check in with our brave wee human friends, our precious vas enemy. So, you will travel to Seattle? Not right away, Jade. I need to find Boa and warn him that he has been discovered and is in danger. Where will you find him? I'm no sure where he is in the world, for his work takes him far afield these days, but I do know where to start. I'll go to where his people live, and I'll need to go quickly. It's time I took a trip to Uluru. So that's the end of chapter 1, the start of book 4, Shadow Canyon. So if you're intrigued to know what that's all about and where the story goes from here, you might like to enjoy reading book 4, though of course you should have already read books 1, 2 and 3 to fully understand what this is all about. Anyway, thank you for your attention. Bye for now.